My name is Nawal Qarooni, and I am an educator and author and teacher educator. And I have the distinct pleasure of being here with my dear friend and amazing fellow kidlit creator and author extraordinaire, Minh Lê.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm so excited to be here with you.
So good to see you. Yeah, I am it's a pleasure and honor to be here with you. I am mostly known as a children's book author, mostly picture books, but I have a background in early childhood education. I have a current job doing childcare policy, so it was really fun to read your work and your perspective on the field and how to kind of make all of these different processes from all these different angles better for children and families. So it's an honor to be here with you.
And we're also both caregivers ourselves. We're both parents. And so it's been amazing to just use your incredible kind of your books both as a mother and then also as a teacher, and then also in family workshops. And so I thought we could take this opportunity to talk about one of my favorites, Drawn Together, and just kind of, you know, my main question is like, what did you hope would come of Drawn Together when families read the book together?
Yeah, I mean, it's this is a book that I like to share the most with people because it's the most personal. For me, what has been really rewarding is this is a book about a kid and his grandfather and their struggle to connect because of a language barrier, right? And that was very much my story. Um, my family is Vietnamese, and I was born in the US, but my parents and my grandparents were born in Vietnam, and they came over as immigrants and refugees. And so my grandparents lived close by when I was growing up, and I spent a lot of time with them, but we didn't know how to talk to each other, right? So it's like I wanted to write a book that captured both like the depth of love there, because we loved each other so much, and there's never any question about that. But I would be sitting at their house, like so close I could reach out and touch my grandfather on the shoulder, and I didn't know how to talk to him. I remember sitting there thinking, like, what do I say? How do I connect to this person who means so much to me? Um, so I wrote the book to kind of capture the complexity of that experience. And what's been really rewarding for me is seeing educators like you and like people using the book as a tool for that connection, right? So a book that was written from my kind of like let inability to connect being used by families and educators to be the vehicle to connect with the people in their lives is so moving to me. So that's more than I could have possibly hoped for. And every time I talk to people and share this book, people come up afterwards and share their own stories with me about their parents or their grandparents and the connections that they've made. And that idea of connection to me is like kind of the theme that connects all of the books I write. So seeing how that's used is a dream come true.
Interesting is we of course don't, we don't have the exact same cultural background, but I have the same type of story. I spoke Farsi, but I didn't speak Arabic. And so my dad's side of the family speaks Arabic and he's Bahraini. And so there were family members that I couldn't connect with, but I spent whole summers with. And the modes of communication and the ways that we were able to communicate despite a language barrier were like so massive. And in the kind of the family lab sites that I run now in districts and in schools, one of the modes of connection is to sit down and to draw together and sit down and write together maps of a special place or something that they can just kind of like talk on the page. Um, and what you see is that there's like no one right way to
Mhm.
connect.
Right.
There's
And
like
I,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was saying I love that you're able to draw the connection. Um, and for me, seeing those different connections from people with all different kinds of backgrounds and different experiences kind of is rewarding to know that there's a universality to those emotions and those dynamics, no matter what the details are of your experience, right?
Yeah.
And then knowing, like you said, that language is one way to connect, but there are so many different ways you can connect, and not feeling that you're just because you're struggling to connect on one avenue, that there aren't so many other ways to explore that will eventually, hopefully, lead to connection on all different fronts, right? But expanding the way that we think about communicating with people, I think is really important. And Another way that I've seen the book used that's been really powerful is um, for exactly that reason, like showing like the different kinds of literacy that there are out there and different ways of storytelling, different ways of communicating with people, and seeing that as part of like this expansion of our understanding of what it means to communicate and be literate is it's so wonderful to feel this book be like one brick in that kind of like that new structure.
I love that. And I think more and more, maybe the wave is going there, expanding the definition of literacy um, to what it means to be human as being kind of like the teaching that we are supposed to do through our storytelling, through your, kidlit creations, through our work with teachers. So I love that.
That's one of my favorite quotes from your book, by the way, when you say that I think it's like literacy is teaching what it means to be human or something along those lines. And like that to me, it's like that is the key thing that we're doing here, right? Like trying to figure out how to be in the world, how to be in the world with other people, and like how to share that sense of humanity with each other. So yeah.
And I think so much of it is also that there's no one right way, right? That like all of our journeys are going to look super different. Our artifacts, the ways that we create things are going to look very different. Our output is going to look very different. If you're thinking in a classroom or if you're a parent, like think of where your dad had right now when your kids bring things home. Like what kinds of questions are we asking that
Mhm.
are not product driven, but are so much more about like all the ways that your kid got to that,
Right.
including a big mess.
And what's a way to put it out for me too is like, because I talk about this book a lot when I go to schools, and it's always in my head coming from this place of failure, right? It's like I failed to make that connection with my grandfather sometimes. And so there's a beauty in it, but there's also like a sense of shame that comes with it, right? And so I share this story with kids. And I often say like when I was younger, Vietnamese was actually my first language. So when I was 4 years old, I spoke Vietnamese, and there's like video of me running around speaking Vietnamese better than I do now. And so I always say, like, if I had a time machine, I'd go back and talk to Min and ask him to please like hold on to your Vietnamese and cultivate and develop it over time because it's such a wonderful gift to have. Um, and that's something that I really mean. But I was doing this at a school once, and this first grade girl raised her hand. Um, she goes, she's like, Mr. Min, you said that if you had a time machine, you'd go back and tell your 4 year old self to hold on to your Vietnamese, right? I said, absolutely. And then she took a second and she said, but if you did that, then we wouldn't have this book. And just like that moment of like seeing that the wisdom of that reflected in the kid to say, like, we all have our own different journeys. Like what you think of as a failure, you can turn into something beautiful. You can turn into something that is productive, that um, pushes through those insecurities and that sense of shortcoming that you have. And there's that transformative power, right? So when you're talking about like there's so many different ways to go about things, my journey on this front took a long time to get there. And it wasn't until this little girl like kind of held a mirror up to the process that I kind of saw that for the first time in a different way.
Ugh, I feel like that's so many of our journeys, and we're trying to make it different for our kids, like the next generation. Because that's
Right.
also mine, trying to not be called Naval, trying to be called Nina, and trying to straighten my hair. And also, like, it all came from a place of insecurity in being othered and an insecurity. And I think also, all of those nuances to me felt shameful. Uh,
Hmm.
you came from a place of failure and disconnect with the language, but really, like beauty was born of it. And so I think we're trying to do something different for our kids, in addition to, embracing mistake making cultures.
Hmm.
And this like the whole, idea of like beautiful oops. I
Uh-huh.
feel like you could make something really gorgeous out of like, the pain or the insecurity or a rift or a rupture or
Another example of that is during the pandemic, I did a Zoom visit with a school in Vietnam, and they knew that I present in English, but there was a kindergarten class, and all they wanted was for me to talk to them in Vietnamese. And I just kind of choked. I was like, I'm really sorry. And there's nothing like a room full of disappointed kindergartners staring back at you to give you the motivation to kind of like finally like get over yourself. So like from that point on, I found a Vietnamese tutor and he and I meet every Sunday to go through language and kind of have like some classes. So I've been working on it. And um a couple last year I was invited to Vietnam to visit a school, and I got to go visit my 100-year-old grandmother and got to sit there and talk with her for hours. And that was like totally a game changer for me because that's something I wasn't able to have for so long with my grandparents. So to kind of like finally get that monkey off my back, to kind of like make forward progress instead of identifying with that barrier, that's quote unquote barrier, right? Like, because for so long, the inability to speak Vietnamese well was something that bothered me, but it was also something that was kind of like core to my identity, right? And I think I held on to that for too long. And it wasn't until the there was an external force that kind of shake me out of that, then I realized, oh wait, no, I can just take actual steps to to do something about this. And it's too bad it took till I was over 40 years old to come to that realization. Um, but so I was able to talk to my grandmother. When I went to Saigon, I was able to talk to the kids and talk to the parents. And like my wife has a whole like file on her phone of like pictures of men talking to people in the market because it's like something that like I wasn't able to do before comfortably. And so it was really beautiful to be able to finally do that. And then actually, so my paternal grandparents who I grew up with in the States are the that's the grandfather that's this story is based on. But my grandmother as well, I wasn't able to communicate with her very often. Since I started taking Vietnamese, something I've been doing is if I have trouble sleeping, I'll like kind of like narrate my day in Vietnamese to kind of like practice my vocabulary. And a couple months ago, I was doing that and I drifted off. And then in my dream, I was walking down the street and my grandmother walks up and we give each other a big hug and we go for a walk and we start chatting in Vietnamese for a couple blocks. And then she stops and she looks at me and she goes, "This has been so nice. We never got to do this while I was alive."
Oh
And
my
I
gosh.
woke up and I was like, that's as close to closure as I could get for that relationship. And just that idea that, nothing is set in stone. Like you're saying, like there's so many different ways to go about things. There's always room for growth. And I think for me, too often, I was holding myself back from that for whatever reason. And so I'm trying to be more conscious of the ways that I am my own worst enemy, or like the one holding myself back. Especially like you said, when it comes to our kids, you don't want your kids to have that. And when you see yourself adopting behaviors that you don't wish on your children, it's kind of like I have to model that for them by not allowing those things to hold me back, right? And show them that it's that you can take on difficult things even if they've been bothering you for a while and kind of do something about it instead of just accepting it for what it is.
Listen, that was such a beautiful story. Oh my gosh. I want you to write about that. And thinking just about like authors and
Mhm.
writing, and creating, so much of it takes like reflection and knowing yourself and finding like the places and the things and observing the humanness in your life that moves you enough to make a book or to
Mhm.
create a thing. Um, and so I think I do that really well as a teacher, the reflection piece, and I think I do that really well as like Naval, the solo human, but I
Mhm.
don't maybe do that very well as a caregiver. Like as a caregiver, it's hard to change the patterns of the ways that I was parented, or
Right.
because that's like so ingrained in me,
Mhm.
or society pressure. There are things that I know are important and true as a teacher and as like an individual who's been working on myself and who's reflective. But as a
Right.
caregiver, I think it's very difficult to
Mhm.
kind of break out of those kind of, whatever it is around should, the ways that
Right.
it should be, the ways that it should look, the ways that I thought it should. And so how can how can we as people who put out stories, how as how do you as someone who makes books and stories for young people, kind of like what messaging can we send to parents about, I don't know, reflection as part of the importance in like revising ourselves.
Well, I mean, when I was listening to you talk about that, and it's like we as caregivers all have our highs and lows, our ups and downs, and we have our moments, right? And I think saying that your words kind of brought up for me is like in order to be a caregiver, you also have to give care to yourself, right? You have to take care of yourself in order to have the bandwidth to care for those around you. You can't neglect your own well-being, right? So for me, that's like having patience with yourself when you have those highs and lows, and also allowing yourself to turn enough attention to yourself to allow for that growth, which is ultimately going to be to the benefit of the people you're taking care of. But if you sideline yourself in the caregiving dynamic, that's ultimately not going to be to anyone's benefit. And I think in the long run, that's going to lead to an unhealthy dynamic, right? So I think making sure that you take time and to also prioritize yourself so that you can prioritize those you're taking care of is really important.
So we get to have a sneak peek of your upcoming book that is like almost out.
It comes out on April 30th, so I can give you a sneak peek, and it actually dovetails nicely with what you're talking about before about making mistakes and such. So I'm excited for you to get to see this. So let me share my screen. Um, so this is called Built to Last. And this is by me and Dan Stantat, the amazing Caldecott medalist, recent National Book Award winning author illustrator. Um, and this is actually the third book that we've done together. So there's Drawn Together, Lift, and The Blur. And talking about caregiving, each of these is about a different relationship, right? So Drawn Together is about kids and their grandparents, Lift is about siblings, and The Blur is about kids and the parents or adults and caregivers in their lives. So when it's time to write a fourth book, I was trying to figure out what to write. And so I landed on the idea of writing a book about friendships, right? And so I sent Dan this book about two friends, and he interpreted it not just as two friends, but as a baby Min and a baby Dan becoming friends. So this is Built to Last. Words by me, pictures by Dan. And here we go. So Built to Last. And it all started with a bang. And these two kids bump into each other and knock over each other's blocks. And we became friends by accident. Ever since that first happy mistake, we've been building together. Working hand in hand, we built things we never could have dreamt up on our own. Yet somehow, crash, those worlds always came tumbling down. We kept building bigger and better creations, which led us to kaboom, bigger and better disasters. Bigger and better train wrecks, crunch. Bigger and better catastrophes, smash. Yet each time, we emerged from the ruins and began again. With each beginning, we knew that our next build was going to be the best one yet. Now we've learned from our mistakes and are finally building something that we want to stand the test of time. Creak. So, womp. The whole thing falls apart again. You know, maybe everything has a breaking point. Maybe not everything can be rebuilt. Maybe there comes a time when it's better to move on and start fresh. And the two kids walk away from each other. But then I remember all the times we picked up the pieces and picked each other up, and I realized some things are too important to give up on. Some things deserve to be repaired no matter how many times they break. And one of the kids is over in the corner building something on his own. So bang, rip, bang. Because maybe it's only when everything around you is falling apart that you discover what is really built to last. You see the two of them have made little gifts for each other to apologize. And instead of giving up on themselves, they go off and build the next great thing. And that is built to last.
Oh, I love it so much. There's so much we could do and talk about with this gorgeous book.
You know, when you're talking about like the beautiful oops and the ability to make mistakes, I was like, oh, I think Built to Last might be right up your alley.
I mean, there are so many. If I were, sitting with my own kids, I would talk about, it's relationships. It's also like making mistakes and trying again. It's also, I mean, there's so much there.
Yay.
What
Yeah, for
was,
me, like the idea of you can be so focused on like you're saying like the product, like the producing something, you forget that the thing that's really important is like the relationship that you're building along the way, right? And I think that's true for so many things in our lives. That we kind of like don't see the what is it, forest for the trees or something like that. And sometimes taking a minute to appreciate that and realize where the value really is, especially when it comes to the people around us, is something that I wanted to put out there.
I love this as, but it's the perfect next one in this four Z. Of friendships, because I also talk a lot about the collective and a lot about it not needing necessarily to be just your blood relatives being the people that we necessarily think are family, and how the collective and the people who shape you and the relationships you have can be like widely varied, and friendship is one of them, and chosen family is one of them.
Mhm.
Thank you
Well,
so
I'm glad I got to share that with you
much. I love it so much. I can't wait for the world to have it next week.
next week.
Yes.
Depends when this video is out because it may be in the past, but next week at the from right now.
It'll be on time.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyways, thank you for being a good friend. It's good to be in community with you. And congratulations on the new book and all the wonderful work that you're doing.
I appreciate you.